They say silence is weakness on the frontier, that the invisible don't survive the choosing. Lyra Vance stood in that hall, surrounded by women who radiated everything she didn't: scent, presence, power, waiting for warlords who selected mates like predators picking prey. One by one, they were claimed. One by one, she was passed over. Until Kyle Draven walked in, the most brutal leader in the Borderlands, a man whose power had killed before. And when he stopped in front of her, when his eyes locked on the girl everyone said was broken, the entire world held its breath. What happened next would shatter every rule they knew. Stay until the end to see how the outcast became the queen. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's go. The choosing hall smelled like sweat and fear, and something else Lyra couldn't name. Desperation, maybe? Or the particular kind of panic that came from knowing your entire future would be decided in the next few hours by men who didn't care about your dreams, or your thoughts, or anything beyond what their instincts told them. Lyra stood at the back of the line, her fingers knotted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd been standing here for 2 hours already, watching woman after woman step forward, watching warlords circle them like wolves testing prey, watching bonds form or fail with a kind of brutal efficiency that left no room for second chances. 23 women had entered this hall at dawn. 15 remained. Lyra was number 19, and she already knew how this would end. The hall itself was a relic from the old wars. Stone walls scarred with blade marks and scorch patterns, torches guttering in iron sconces that had been hammered into the rock by hands that were dust now. A ceiling so high the shadows seemed to breathe and shift with every flicker of flame. It had been built for blood and power, constructed during the Fracture Wars when the Borderlands were still being carved out of chaos, and tonight it would serve its original purpose again. The choosing wasn't romantic, it wasn't gentle, it wasn't even particularly fair. It was survival dressed up in ceremony, and everyone in this room knew it. At the front, Mira Halverson was already mid-claim. The warlord who'd chosen her, Hrothgar of the Northern Ridge, a man with shoulders like a bull and scars that mapped a lifetime of violence, had his hand around her throat, not choking, just holding, his fingers spanning her neck in a way that should have been threatening but somehow wasn't. His nose pressed against her temple, inhaling deeply, and Mira's eyes fluttered closed, her body going soft and pliant under the weight of his dominance. The bond scent was visible even from where Lyra stood, a faint shimmer in the air between them, like heat rising from Summerstone, like something alive and electric. "Accepted," Hrothgar growled, and the hall erupted in low cheers and the stomping of boots on stone. Mira was led away, glowing, triumphant, her hand clasped in Hrothgar's like she'd won some great prize. She didn't even glance back at the women still waiting. Why would she? Her future was secure now. She'd be mated, protected, given status and territory, and children who would inherit both their strengths. Lyra watched her go and felt nothing. No envy, no longing, no bitter resentment, just the dull certainty that she would never be that woman, because Lyra Vance had no scent. In the Borderlands, everything revolved around it. The bond scent, the signal, the presence that marked you as compatible, as chosen, as worthy of protection in a world that offered precious little of it. It was pheromonal, instinctive, older than language or law. When a dominant found their match, they knew. The air around them thickened, their pupils blew wide. Their entire body locked onto one person like a missile finding its target, like a compass pointing true north, like recognition at the cellular level. Lyra had seen it happen dozens of times. She had never been it. At 14, when the other girls started developing their scents, honey and smoke, petrichor and spice, copper and rain, Lyra had waited. She'd stood in front of mirrors, held her wrist to her nose, asked her mother if she could smell anything different. Nothing. At 16, when her mother dragged her to the healers, demanding answers, demanding to know why her daughter wasn't blooming like the others, they'd found nothing wrong, no blockage, no illness, no hormone imbalance, just absence. Some people are late bloomers, the healer had said, but her eyes told a different story. Her eyes said damaged. At 18, Lyra stopped waiting. At 20, she stopped hoping. At 22, she accepted the truth. And now, at 23, she stood in the choosing hall, with women half her age, knowing she was about to be exiled for the crime of being invisible. Next! The overseer's voice cut through the noise like a blade. A girl named Sana stepped forward, her hands trembling visibly, her scent already flaring in nervous bursts that Lyra couldn't smell but could see in the way the nearest warlords turned their heads. Sweet almond, someone had told her once. Sweet almond undercut with iron, like blood on honey. The warlord approaching her was older, scarred, his braids threaded with bone beads that clicked when he moved. He stopped 3 feet away, his head tilting, and inhaled. Nothing. His expression didn't change. He just moved on, walking past Sana like she was furniture. Sana's face crumpled. She stepped back into line, and Lyra saw her fighting tears. Her jaw clenched so tight it must have hurt. 2 more warlords passed her by. The 4th paused, tilted his head like a dog hearing something distant, then shook it slowly and walked away. Sana would get 1 more round. If no one claimed her by then, she'd be exiled with Lyra and whoever else failed to match. At least I won't be alone, Lyra thought, and immediately hated herself for the selfishness of it. The next hour was a blur of claims and rejections. Alara, the blacksmith's daughter, broad-shouldered and strong from years at the forge, was claimed by a warlord from the Ashlands. Her scent had been sharp and metallic, and he'd reacted to it like a man catching fire, his whole body going rigid before he lunged forward and grabbed her by the waist, lifting her clean off the ground. They'd barely made it out of the hall before he had her pinned against the wall outside, and the crowd had laughed, approving, because that kind of desperate need was exactly what the choosing was supposed to produce. Joss, who worked in the stables and always smelled faintly of horses and hay, was claimed by a quieter man, still dangerous, still dominant, but steadier. He'd scented her and smiled, actually smiled, and Joss had smiled back, tentative but real, and Lyra had looked away because it hurt to watch something that gentle in a place this brutal. Kara went next, then Lysanda, then 2 sisters whose names Lyra didn't know, claimed by warlords who were cousins and negotiated to keep the families aligned. 1 by 1, the line thinned. 15 women left. 12. 10. Lyra's heart was beating too fast now, her palms slick with sweat she couldn't wipe away without everyone seeing. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to stand in front of men who would look at her like she was broken, who would smell her and find nothing, who would walk away like she didn't exist, or, worse, stop long enough to confirm that yes, there really was something wrong with her. But there was no choice. If you didn't attend the choosing, you were exiled anyway. At least this way, there was a chance. A slim, impossible chance, but still, a chance Lyra didn't believe in. Vance! Her name hit her like a slap. Lyra stepped forward, her legs stiff, her throat dry as sand. The overseer, a gray-haired woman named Thorne, who'd seen 50 choosings and had no patience left for anyone's feelings, gave her a flat, pitying look that somehow managed to be more cutting than open contempt. "You're up." Lyra nodded. She couldn't speak. Her voice had abandoned her somewhere around the 3rd rejection she'd witnessed. The warlord approaching was younger than most, maybe 30, with a shaved head and ink crawling up his neck in patterns that marked him as ridge-born. His eyes swept over her once, dismissive, already moving past her before he'd even gotten close. But protocol demanded he check. He leaned in, inhaled, frowned, inhaled again, deeper this time, like he was trying to find something buried under layers of nothing. His frown deepened. He stepped back, his expression shifting from confusion to something colder. "No," he said simply, and walked past her without another glance. Lyra exhaled shakily. 1 down, 3 more to go. The 2nd warlord didn't even get that close. He stopped 5 feet away, scented the air like he was checking for smoke, and shook his head before she could even make eye contact. The 3rd was worse. He was older, grizzled, with scars that told stories Lyra didn't want to know, and eyes that had seen things that left marks on the soul. He stepped up to her slowly, his face unreadable, and bent low enough that his breath ghosted over her collarbone. He stayed there for a long moment, and Lyra's heart hammered so hard she thought he might actually hear it, might feel the vibration of her fear through the air between them. Then he pulled back, his lip curling in disgust. "Defective," he muttered, loud enough for the hall to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd like a wave. Not everyone laughed. Some people had the decency to look uncomfortable, but enough did that the sound filled the space, echoing off stone walls, and Lyra's face burned with shame so intense it felt like fever. She didn't move. She stood there, frozen, while the man walked away and the laughter grew louder, and someone in the back made a joke she couldn't quite hear but knew was about her. "Next!" Thorne barked, and the word felt like mercy. Lyra stumbled back into line on legs that didn't quite work right. Her hands were shaking now, tremors she couldn't control no matter how hard she pressed them against her thighs. She stared at the floor, counting stones, counting breaths, counting anything that wasn't the weight of 100 eyes on her back. Defective. She'd heard it before. Whispered in the market by women who thought she couldn't hear. Muttered by healers who ran out of explanations and resorted to blame. Implied by her mother's silence when relatives asked why Lyra wasn't mated yet. But never this loud. Never this public. Never with an audience that found it funny. Bulk. The choosing continued. Sana was claimed in the next round. A minor warlord from the Eastern Valleys. Not prestigious, not powerful, but enough. Enough to save her from exile. She left crying, though Lyra couldn't tell if it was relief or fear or just the overwhelming weight of knowing her life had just changed forever, and she had no control over how. A girl named Petra was rejected 3 times in a row and looked ready to shatter. She was 18, barely, with wide eyes and a scent that apparently wasn't strong enough or distinct enough or whatever the hell it was that made these men choose one woman over another. By the time the hall thinned to the final few, only 3 women remained unclaimed. Lyra, Petra, and Lyselle, a woman in her 30s who'd been through 2 choosings already and knew exactly what exile meant. Her face was set like stone, resigned but not broken. Not yet. The overseer glanced at the 3 of them, her expression hard. "One more round," she said. "Then it's done." Lyra's stomach turned over. One more round meant one more chance for humiliation, one more parade of men who would look at her and see nothing, or worse, see something wrong. She almost walked out, almost turned on her heel and left and saved herself the final degradation of standing there while men confirmed what everyone already knew. But her feet wouldn't move. Because as much as she wanted to leave, as much as every instinct screamed at her to run, there was still that tiny, stupid part of her that whispered, what if? What if someone saw something different? What if? The doors at the far end of the hall, the massive oak doors reserved for the highest-ranked warlords, the ones who didn't need to arrive early because everyone would wait for them, opened with a sound like thunder, and Kael Draven walked in. The hall went silent. Not the polite silence of anticipation, not the respectful quiet of ceremony. The kind of silence that came when predators entered the room and every prey animal stopped breathing at once. Kael Draven was not a large man. He wasn't the biggest warlord Lyra had seen tonight, wasn't the most scarred or the most decorated or the most obviously dangerous. But he didn't need to be any of those things. He was power in a skin that barely contained it, tall and lean, with black hair pulled back in a severe knot that emphasized the sharp angles of his face, and eyes so pale they looked almost colorless in the torchlight, like ice, like winter sky, like something that saw straight through you. He moved like a blade, economical, precise, absolutely lethal, every step deliberate, every gesture controlled. His presence didn't fill the room, it devoured it, and everywhere he walked, people stepped back. Not because he pushed them. He didn't need to, they just moved instinctively, creating space around him like water parting for a shark. Lyra had heard the stories. Everyone had. Kael Draven ruled the Shard Belt Reach, the most hostile territory in the Borderlands, a stretch of broken ground and shattered stone where nothing grew easy and everything fought to survive. He'd taken it at 19 by killing the previous warlord in single combat, a fight that had lasted 3 hours and left both men bloody, but only one alive. He'd held it for a decade through sheer, unrelenting brutality, crushing challenges before they fully formed, maintaining order through a combination of strategic brilliance and a willingness to do things other leaders wouldn't. He didn't negotiate unless negotiation served him. He didn't compromise unless compromise was victory by another name. He didn't forgive. But the worst story, the one that made even other warlords uneasy, the one that got told in whispers, was about his sensitivity. Kael Draven didn't just sense bond sense the way other dominants did. He was overwhelmed by them. Most dominants experience the pull as something sharp and clear, a lock finding its key, a puzzle piece clicking into place. Focused, directional, manageable. For KL, it was chaos. Every scent hit him like a shockwave, scrambling his senses, triggering reactions he couldn't always control. The stronger the scent, the worse the reaction. There were stories of him collapsing during choosings, of violent outbursts when too many scents hit him at once, of a woman in the Southern Territories who'd nearly died because her bond scent triggered something in him so violent he'd grabbed her by the throat before his own people could pull him off. After that, he'd stopped attending choosings entirely. For 5 years, he'd ruled alone, refusing to take a mate, refusing to risk another incident. Until tonight. Bartet. Kael stopped in the center of the hall, his gaze sweeping over the remaining women with an expression that gave away nothing. Petra flinched visibly when his eyes passed over her. Lissel straightened, trying to look strong, trying to project confidence, but her hands betrayed her, clenched tight at her sides, white-knuckled. Lyra just stared. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. Stand straighter? Lower her eyes? Step forward? It didn't matter. Kael wasn't looking at her yet. He turned toward Petra first, the youngest, and the girl made a small choked sound in the back of her throat. He didn't approach her directly, didn't need to. He tilted his head slightly, inhaled, and his entire body went rigid. It happened fast. His pupils dilated so quickly it looked painful, blown wide and black, his jaw locking, his shoulders drawing up tight. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a second, just a second, Lyra saw something like panic flash across his face before he crushed it down. The bond scent must have hit him hard. Too hard. He staggered back a step, his breathing suddenly ragged, harsh in the silence. "No," he bit out, his voice raw and strained. "Not her." Petra let out a sob, relief or disappointment, impossible to tell, and nearly collapsed. One of the attendants moved forward to steady her. Kael turned away sharply, his shoulders tight, his whole body radiating tension. Lyra could see the way his hands were trembling, just slightly, the way he was fighting for control. She'd never seen anything like it. Lissel was next. Kael approached her more carefully this time, his movements controlled, deliberate, like he was handling something explosive. He stopped a few feet away, farther than protocol usually demanded, and scented the air. The reaction was immediate and worse. His head snapped back like he'd been struck, a snarl ripping out of him that made Lissel stumble backward into the woman behind her. It wasn't a human sound. It was something deeper, more primal, the kind of sound that triggered every flight instinct in the room. The overseer moved forward, alarmed, her hand going to the blade at her belt. But Kael raised a hand, stopping her, stopping everyone. "No," he said again, his voice shaking now with the effort of control. "Not her." Lissel looked ready to cry or scream or both. And then Kael turned toward Lyra. She didn't move. Couldn't. Every muscle in her body had locked down, fear and adrenaline turning her into a statue. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and Lyra's heart slammed into her ribs so hard she thought it might actually crack bone. He stopped, right in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the tension in the cords of his neck, the way his chest rose and fell too fast like he'd been running, close enough that if he reacted the way he had to the others, she'd have no time to move. He leaned in. Lyra closed her eyes, bracing for the rejection, for the disgust, for the violent recoil she'd seen him have with Lissel. Here it comes, she thought, the confirmation, the final proof that I'm nothing. She opened her eyes. Kael was still there, his face inches from hers, his expression confused. He inhaled slowly, carefully. And then something shifted. The tension in his shoulders eased, the rigidity in his spine loosened, the harsh set of his jaw softened, just fractionally, and for the first time since he'd entered the hall, he looked like he could breathe. No, not just breathe, like he could think. He inhaled again, deeper this time, and his eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, there was something in them Lyra didn't understand. Recognition. Not of her. She'd never met this man. Recognition of something else. Something that made his whole posture change. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes directly, and Lyra saw confusion there, yes, but also certainty. "You," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel. "I choose you." The hall exploded. Lyra couldn't hear what they were shouting. Her ears were ringing, her vision narrowing to the man in front of her, the man who'd just claimed her, the man who wasn't supposed to claim anyone, who hadn't claimed anyone in 5 years. Thorn was yelling something, her face red. Other warlords were on their feet, objecting, demanding explanations, calling this a violation of protocol. Someone was shouting that it wasn't valid, that Kyle hadn't followed procedure, that he couldn't just choose the defective one, the broken one, the one with no scent. Kyle didn't move. He kept his eyes on Lyra, and when he spoke again, it was only to her, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear it under the chaos. "Do you accept?" It wasn't a command, wasn't an assumption, it was a question. A real one, that expected a real answer, that gave her a choice when she'd thought she had none left. Lyra's mouth was dry. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of disbelief and terror, and something she didn't have a name for, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She should say no, should walk away from this man who everyone feared, who'd nearly killed women before, who was clearly as damaged as she was. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Yes." The word was barely a whisper, but Kyle heard it. His hand closed around hers, firm, warm, grounding, and he turned to face the hall. "She is mine," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. Clear, absolute. "Anyone who disputes this can meet me outside." The silence that followed was total. No one moved. No one was that stupid. Challenging Kyle Draven to single combat over a choosing dispute was a death sentence, and everyone in the room knew it. Thorn stepped forward, her face like thunder. "This is irregular. She has no scent. The bond cannot form properly without—" "The bond has formed," Kyle interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I have chosen. She has accepted. It is done." "The council will hear of this," Thorn said, but there was no real threat in it, just bureaucratic protest. "Let them," Kale said simply. He tugged Lyra forward gently, and she followed, her legs moving on autopilot, her mind still trying to catch up to what had just happened. As they passed Thorn, the overseer caught Lyra's arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. "You don't know what you've just done," she hissed, her eyes boring into Lyra's. "You don't know what he is." Lyra looked at her, then at Kale's back, straight and unyielding, then back to Thorn. "Neither do you," she whispered. Thorn's hand dropped, and Lyra walked out of the choosing hall on the arm of the most dangerous man in the Borderlands, into a future she couldn't begin to imagine, toward a life that had just become impossibly complicated. Behind them, the hall remained silent until the doors closed. Then the explosion of voices began again, but by then, Lyra couldn't hear them. She was too busy trying to understand why her hand, clasped in Kale Draven's, felt like the first safe thing she'd touched in years. The walk from the choosing hall to Kyle's quarters took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. Lyra had never been in the warlord's wing of the compound before. No one went there unless summoned, and she'd never had reason to be summoned. The corridors were wider here, the stone darker, polished smooth by centuries of use. Torches burned in sconces that looked like they'd been forged by masters, not the rough ironwork of the outer halls. Guards stood at intervals, all of them watching as Kyle passed with Lyra in tow, their faces carefully blank, but their eyes tracking every movement. Kale's grip on her hand never loosened, not harsh, not painful, just constant, present, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go, or maybe like he needed the anchor as much as she did. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? Lyra's mind was still spinning, still trying to process what had happened in the hall. The rejection she'd expected, the claim she hadn't. The way Kyle had looked at her like she was the solution to a problem no one else had understood. They passed a group of servants who immediately pressed themselves against the wall, eyes down. One of them whispered something Lyra couldn't catch, but she heard the tone. Shock. Disbelief. Of course. News traveled fast in the compound, and this was going to be the scandal of the decade. Kale Draven, the most powerful warlord in the Shardbelt Reach, had chosen the defective girl, the broken one. The one with no scent. Lyra's stomach churned. They rounded a corner and Kyle stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, releasing her hand only long enough to push it open. He gestured her inside, then followed, closing the door behind them with a solid thunk that felt final. Lyra stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, and looked around. It wasn't what she expected. She'd imagined something brutal, Spartan, all weapons and stone. But while the room was clearly functional, a large bed against one wall, a desk covered in maps and papers, weapons mounted within easy reach, there was also care in it. A thick rug that muffled footsteps, books on shelves, a window that overlooked the valley, the glass clean enough to actually see through. It looked like someone lived here, not just slept here. Kale moved past her to the far side of the room, putting distance between them, and turned to face her. In the better light, she could see the strain on his face, the tension still coiled in his shoulders. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "In the hall, when they laughed. Are you hurt?" Lyra blinked. No, I'm fine." "Don't lie to me." His voice was sharp but not cruel. "I can't sense most things about you, so I need you to tell me the truth. Are you hurt?" She opened her mouth to say no again, then stopped. Thought about it. Really thought about it. "My pride is hurt," she said finally. "Does that count?" Something that might have been humor flickered across his face. "It counts." Silence stretched between them. Lyra shifted her weight, uncomfortable. "Why did you choose me?" Kael studied her for a long moment. "Because you're the only woman in that hall who didn't feel like she was trying to kill me." "I don't understand." "I know." He moved to the desk, braced his hands against it, and stared down at the maps. "Sit. This is going to take a while." Lyra sat on the edge of a chair, her back straight, her hands in her lap. Waiting. Kael didn't look at her when he started talking. Most dominant sense bond sense as a pull, a draw, something that says this one, not that one. It's clear, simple. He paused. For me, it's not simple. Every scent hits me like standing too close to a forge. Overwhelming, painful. It scrambles my senses until I can't think, can't function. The stronger the scent, the worse it gets. Lyra remembered the way he'd reacted to Petra, to Lissel, the way he'd looked like he was in pain. "That's why you stopped attending choosings," she said quietly. "That's why I stopped a lot of things." His jaw tightened. 5 years ago, I tried. I thought I could manage it, thought I could push through and just pick someone, anyone. But the scents were too much. I lost control. Nearly killed a woman before my guards pulled me off. "The Southern Territories," Lyra said, remembering the story. Kael's hands curled into fists on the desk. "She survived. Barely. I exiled myself from choosings after that, swore I wouldn't risk it again." He turned to look at her finally, and his eyes were bleak. "But the council has been pressuring me for years. An unmated warlord is unstable, they say. Untrustworthy. A liability. They threatened to strip my territory if I didn't at least try again." "So you came tonight?" "So I came tonight," he confirmed, expecting the same thing, expecting to fail, expecting to hurt someone else. He paused. "And then I got to you." Lyra's heart was beating too fast again. "What happened?" "Nothing," Kael said, and the word hung in the air like a revelation. "I scented you and felt nothing. No overwhelming surge, no pain, no scrambled senses. Just," he gestured vaguely, "quiet." "Because I don't have a scent," Lyra said, and she couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Because I'm defective." "Because you're compatible," Kael corrected sharply. "Everyone else in that room was too much. You were exactly enough." Lyra stared at him. That's not how bonding works." "Apparently it is." Kael pushed off from the desk, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted suddenly, like the adrenaline that had carried him through the choosing was finally wearing off. "I don't understand it either, but I know what I felt, or didn't feel, and I know that for the first time in my life, I stood in a room full of bond scents and didn't want to claw my own skin off." "So you chose me because I'm quiet?" "I chose you because you let me think." He looked at her and there was something raw in his expression. Do you have any idea what that's like? To spend your entire life fighting just to function? To have your own instincts turn against you every time you try to do what everyone says you're supposed to do? Lyra did know. Not in the same way, but she knew what it was like to be told you were broken. To have your body fail at the one thing it was supposed to do. So what now? She asked quietly. Kyle's expression shuddered. Now we figure out how to survive the fallout. The fallout started the next morning. Lyra woke in an unfamiliar bed, not Kyle's, but a smaller room adjoining his quarters that he'd given her without discussion. She'd slept poorly, her mind racing, and dawn found her staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if yesterday had actually happened or if she'd dreamed the entire thing. A knock on the door answered that question. "Enter," Lyra called, sitting up. A woman came in, older, with gray-streaked hair and a face that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. She carried a tray with bread and tea and set it down on the small table near the window. "I'm Marta," she said without preamble. "I run the household staff. You'll report to me for anything you need." Thank you," Lyra said, climbing out of bed. She was still wearing yesterday's dress, rumpled now and uncomfortable. "I didn't expect. Kyle sent word you were to be given quarters and meals. I'm following orders." Marta's tone was brisk, professional, but her eyes said she wasn't happy about it. "Eat, then get dressed. The council wants to see you." Lyra's stomach dropped. "The council?" "They've called an emergency session, you and Kyle both." Marta moved toward the door, then paused. "Advice? Don't try to defend yourself. Don't try to explain. Just stand there and let Kyle handle it. The more you talk, the worse you'll make it." She left before Lyra could respond. Lyra stared at the closed door, then at the food. Her appetite had vanished, but she forced herself to eat anyway. Marta was right. She needed to be ready. An hour later, dressed in clean clothes that Marta had left for her, simple, practical, nothing fancy, Lyra followed a guard through the compound to the council chambers. The walk was worse than yesterday's. Everyone stared. Servants, guards, other warlords. Their eyes followed her like brands, and Lyra heard the whispers even when they tried to be quiet. "That's her? The one with no scent? What was he thinking?" She must have done something, tricked him somehow. Lyra kept her eyes forward and her chin up, the way her mother had taught her when she was young. Don't let them see you break. The council chambers were smaller than she expected. A circular room with a high ceiling and windows that let in cold morning light. 5 people sat at a curved table. 3 men, 2 women, all of them older, all of them wearing the marks of their territories. Kale was already there, standing in front of the table with his arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Lyra took her place beside him, and he glanced at her briefly, something unreadable in his eyes. "Finally," one of the council members said, a woman with silver hair and a scar across her cheek. "We can begin." The session was brutal. They started with questions about the choosing itself. Had Kyle followed protocol? Had he scented Lyra properly? Had she been coerced? Kale answered each question with clipped precision, his tone flat, his patience clearly wearing thin. Then they moved to Lyra. "You claim you have no bond scent," the silver-haired woman said. "Is that correct?" "I don't claim it," Lyra said quietly. "It's true. I've been tested by healers. There's nothing there. And yet Warlord Draven chose you." "Yes." "Why do you think that is?" Lyra hesitated. She could feel Kyle tense beside her, could sense that this was a trap somehow. "I don't know," she said finally. "You'd have to ask him." "We're asking you." This from one of the men, heavy set with a beard that reached his chest. "What did you do to make him choose you?" "Nothing," Lyra said, her temper flaring despite Marta's advice. "I stood there. I did nothing." "Exactly," the man said, leaning forward. "You did nothing. You have nothing. No scent, no presence, no value to offer. And yet the most powerful unmated warlord in the Borderlands chose you over women who were clearly superior." He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "So I'll ask again, what did you do?" "She did nothing," Kyle cut in, his voice hard. "I chose her because she's compatible with me in a way no one else was. The bond formed. That's all that matters." "The bond did not form," the silver-haired woman said coolly. "Not properly. A bond requires assent on both sides. Without it, this arrangement is incomplete at best, fraudulent at worst. The bond formed, Kyle repeated, each word sharp as a knife. I felt it. I know what I felt. What you felt, another council member said, a thin man with sharp eyes, was absence, not presence. You reacted to the lack of stimulus, not the presence of a true bond. That's not the same thing. It is for me. It's not legally binding, the woman countered. The laws of the choosing are clear. Both parties must present a bond sent. If one party cannot, then the laws are wrong, Kyle said flatly. The room went silent. The silver-haired woman's eyes narrowed. Careful, Warlord Draven. That sounds dangerously close to sedition. It sounds like reality, Kale shot back. The laws were written for people who fit a specific pattern. I don't fit that pattern. She doesn't fit that pattern. But the bond is real, and I'm not dissolving it because you don't understand it. You don't have a choice, the bearded man said. The council has the authority to invalidate choosings that don't meet legal standards. This one doesn't. It's void. Try it, Kale said softly, dangerously. Invalidate my choosing, declare my bond void, and see what happens. The threat hung in the air like smoke. The council members exchanged glances. They knew what Kyle was implying. He controlled the largest territory in the Borderlands. He commanded loyalty from warriors who would follow him into hell. If he decided to fight this, it wouldn't be a legal battle. It would be a war. The silver-haired woman cleared her throat. We're not interested in conflict, Warlord Draven. We're interested in maintaining order, stability. The laws exist for a reason. Then change the laws, Kyle said. That's not something we can do overnight. I'm not asking you to do it overnight. I'm asking you to do it at all. Another silence. Finally, the thin man leaned back in his chair. We'll take this under advisement. In the meantime, your arrangement will be considered provisional. You may keep her in your quarters, but the bond will not be recognized officially until we've reviewed the legal precedents and made a determination. How long? Kyle asked. As long as it takes. Kyle's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. However, the silver-haired woman added, her eyes shifting to Lyra, there is one condition. If we're to consider legitimizing this bond, we need proof that it's real, that it functions, that it serves its purpose. Lyra's stomach sank. What kind of proof? You'll be tested, the woman said. Both of you. We'll observe how you interact in situations that would normally trigger bond responses. If we see evidence of a genuine connection, functional compatibility, mutual stabilization, anything that suggests this is more than just novelty, we'll reconsider our position. And if you don't see evidence, Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer, then the bond will be dissolved, and you'll both be free to attend the next choosing. The woman's smile was cold. Separately, of course. They left the council chambers in silence. Kale walked fast, his stride eating up the corridors, and Lyra had to almost jog to keep up. He didn't speak until they were back in his quarters with the door closed. Then he slammed his fist into the wall hard enough to crack stone. Lyra jumped, her heart racing. Kale, they're going to test us, he said, his voice shaking with rage. They're going to watch us like animals in a cage and judge whether we're compatible enough for their standards. He turned to face her, and his eyes were wild. Do you understand what that means? They're going to push every boundary, every limit, trying to break this bond before it even has a chance to solidify. What will they do? Lyra asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. I don't know. Kale ran both hands through his hair, disheveling it. Stress tests, probably. Situations designed to trigger protective instincts, bonding behaviors, anything that proves we react to each other the way mated pairs are supposed to. And if we don't react the right way, then we're done. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear in his eyes. They'll dissolve the bond, force me to choose someone else, exile you for fraud. Lyra's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the nearest chair. Fraud? I didn't do anything. But they don't care. Kale's laugh was bitter. They've decided you're a threat to the system, to the laws, to everything they've built their power on. If they can prove you tricked me somehow, They'll use it to strengthen their control over future choosings. I didn't trick you, Lyra said, her voice fierce now. I didn't even want to be chosen. I know. Kale crossed to her, crouched down so they were eye level. I know, but they don't care about truth. They care about precedent. And right now we're setting a precedent they can't tolerate. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion, the fear, the desperation he was trying to hide. What do we do? She asked. Kale's jaw tightened. We fight. We prove the bond is real, even if we have to fake parts of it. We give them exactly what they want to see. He paused, and we hope it's enough. The first test came 2 days later. They were summoned to the training grounds at dawn. No explanation, no warning, just orders. When they arrived, the council was already there, along with what looked like half the compound. Word had spread. People wanted to watch. The silver-haired woman, her name was Counselor Varen, Lyra had learned, stood in the center of the grounds with her arms crossed. Warlord Draven, Miss Vance, thank you for joining us. We didn't have a choice, Kyle said flatly. Varen smiled thinly. True. Today's test is simple. We want to observe your bond responses under mild stress. Nothing dangerous, just illuminating. She gestured, and 2 guards brought forward a young man, maybe 20, struggling between them. His face was bruised, his hands bound. This is Garrett, Varen said. He was caught stealing from the armory last night. The punishment for theft is public flogging. 20 lashes. Kyle's expression didn't change. What does this have to do with us? You'll administer the punishment, Varen said, while Miss Vance watches. Lyra's stomach turned to ice. Why? Kale asked, though his tone said he already knew. Because bonded pairs share emotional responses. If your bond is real, Miss Vance should feel distress when you're forced to cause pain. She should react. Try to stop you, perhaps, or at least show visible discomfort. Varen's eyes glittered. If she doesn't react at all, well, that tells us something too, doesn't it? It was a trap. A perfect trap. If Lyra reacted too much, they'd say she was faking. If she didn't react enough, they'd say the bond was false. Kael looked at Lyra, and she saw the question in his eyes. Can you do this? Lyra thought about exile, about being cast out into the wastelands with nothing, about the life that waited for her if she failed this test. She straightened her spine and met Varen's gaze. I'll watch, she said quietly. Varen's smile widened. Excellent. They positioned Garrett in the center of the grounds, tying his hands to a post. Someone handed Kael a whip, leather, braided, designed to hurt without killing. Kael took it, his face carved from stone. Lyra stood 10 feet away, her hands clenched at her sides, and made herself watch. The first strike landed with a crack that echoed across the grounds. Garrett screamed. Lyra flinched but didn't look away. The second strike, the third, the fourth. Blood began to seep through Garrett's shirt. Lyra's stomach churned, bile rising in her throat, but she didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched Kael's face, the way his jaw was set, the way his eyes had gone cold and distant. He wasn't enjoying this. She could see that much. But he wasn't stopping either. 10 lashes. 15. Garrett's screams had turned to sobs. Lyra felt something break inside her chest. Not the bond, because there was no bond. Not really, but something else. Something that recognized suffering and couldn't stand silent anymore. Stop, she said. Kael paused mid-swing. Varen leaned forward, interested. What was that? I said stop. Lyra stepped forward, her voice stronger now. He's had enough. 20 lashes will kill him at this rate. 15 is sufficient to make the point. The punishment is 20, Varen said coldly, not 15. Then reduce the punishment, Lyra shot back. You're testing our bond, not trying to murder a thief. The law is the law. The law is flexible when you want it to be, Lyra said, and she was angry now, really angry. All the fear and humiliation of the past days boiling over. You bent it to question our bond. Bend it to show mercy. Varen studied her for a long moment. Interesting. You'd challenge the council to save a stranger. I'd challenge anyone who mistakes cruelty for justice, Lyra said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Silence. Then Kael lowered the whip, She's right, he said, his voice rough. 15 is enough. I won't do more. Varen's eyes narrowed. You're refusing a direct order? I'm exercising judgment, Kyle corrected. Something I'm entitled to do as a warlord. The punishment stands at 15 lashes. Garrett survives. Everyone learns their lesson. He dropped the whip and turned to Lyra, something fierce in his eyes. Are we done here? Varen looked between them, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. For now, you may go. Kale took Lyra's arm and led her away from the training grounds, away from the crowd, back toward the compound. Neither of them spoke until they were alone in the corridor. Then Kyle stopped, turned to her and said, That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Which do you think it was? Lyra asked, still shaking with adrenaline. Both. He studied her face. You didn't have to do that. You could have just stood there. Let me finish. That would have been safer. Safer for who? For you. Lyra shook her head. I don't know how to do this, any of this. But I know what cruelty looks like, and I won't stand silent and watch it just to save my own skin. Something shifted in Kyle's expression. Something that looked almost like respect. They're going to use that against you, he said quietly. Your compassion. They'll push harder next time. Let them, Lyra said, and meant it. Kale's hand came up, hesitated, then settled gently on her shoulder. You're not what I expected, he said. Neither are you, Lyra replied. And for the first time since the choosing, something that felt like understanding passed between them. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The understanding lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of careful distance, of learning how to exist in the same space without colliding. 3 days of Lyra sleeping in the adjoining room while Kyle worked late into the night, poring over maps and reports. 3 days of shared meals eaten in silence, of cautious conversations that never went deeper than necessary. 3 days before the council struck again. This time, they didn't bother with summons or formality. They simply arrived at Kyle's quarters at dawn with a full guard contingent, Counselor Varen at the head, her expression carved from ice. Lyra was still half asleep when Marta burst into her room. Get dressed. Now. They're here. Who's here? The council. All of them. Lyra's blood went cold. She threw on clothes, her fingers clumsy with panic, and stumbled into the main room to find Kyle already facing down 5 council members, his body rigid with barely controlled fury. This is my private residence, he was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. You have no authority to— We have every authority, Varen interrupted. Under Section 7 of the Territorial Accords, the Council may inspect any warlord's holdings when questions of legitimacy arise. Your bond is under review. Therefore, so are you. You can't just— We can, Varen said flatly. She turned to Lyra, her eyes cold. Miss Vance, come here. Lyra moved forward on legs that felt like water. Kale shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the council, and Varen's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. How protective, she murmured. Interesting. What do you want? Kyle demanded. Answers. Varen gestured to one of the other council members, the bearded man Lyra remembered from the first session. He stepped forward carrying a leather case, which he set on Kyle's desk and opened. Inside were vials, dozens of them, filled with clear liquid. What is that? Lyra asked, though part of her already knew. Concentrated bond scent, the bearded man said. Collected from successfully mated pairs across the territories. We're going to administer them to Warlord Draven and observe his reactions. Kale went very still. No. It's not optional, Varen said. If your bond with Miss Vance is genuine, exposure to other scents shouldn't affect you. You should remain stable, focused on her. She paused. But if the bond is false, if you chose her simply because she provided absence rather than presence, then these scents will overwhelm you just as they always have. And we'll have our answer. You're trying to break him, Lyra said, her voice shaking. You're trying to trigger the exact thing that's nearly killed him before. We're trying to verify the truth, Varen corrected. Surely if the bond is real, it will protect him. Unless you're suggesting it won't? The trap closed around them like jaws. If they refused, the council would declare the bond false by default. If they agreed and Kyle broke under the exposure, the same result. Either way, they lost. Lyra looked at Kyle and saw him calculating the same thing, saw the moment he reached the same conclusion she had. There was no way out. Fine, Kyle said, the word like gravel. Do it. Kyle, no, Lyra started, but he cut her off with a look. We don't have a choice. The bearded council member selected a vial, one of the smaller ones, Lyra noted with dim relief, and approached Kyle carefully. He uncorked it, and even from across the room, Lyra saw Kyle's shoulders tense. Inhale, the man instructed. Kyle did. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his pupils blew wide, his entire body going rigid like he'd been struck by lightning. His hands curled into fists, his breathing turned harsh and ragged, and Lyra saw sweat break out across his forehead. Kyle, she said, stepping forward. Stay back, he gritted out, his voice barely human. The council member corked the vial and stepped away, watching with clinical interest. Kyle's jaw was clenched so tight, Lyra thought his teeth might crack. He was fighting it, fighting the overload, the chaos, the violent impulses that came with it. She could see the battle playing out across his face, could see him losing. That's enough, Lyra said sharply. You've made your point. We're just getting started, Varen replied. She nodded to the bearded man who selected another vial, larger this time. No, Lyra said, moving to stand between them and Kyle. Absolutely not. Move aside, Miss Vance. Make me. The guards shifted, hands going to weapons, and Kyle made a sound that was half snarl, half warning. His control was slipping. Lyra could see it fraying at the edges, could see the way his hands were trembling now. If the bond is real, Varen said, her voice hard, then your presence should stabilize him, should calm him, unless it doesn't, unless this entire charade is built on nothing. It's not a charade, Lyra said desperately. He chose me because I don't trigger the overload. But that doesn't mean he's immune to it. You're deliberately trying to break him and calling it a test. Then prove me wrong, Varen said. Calm him. Show us this miraculous bond in action. Lyra turned to Kyle, who was barely holding on, his whole body shaking with the effort of not losing control. She had no idea what she was doing, no idea if this would work, but she stepped close anyway, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to see the wildness in his eyes. Kyle, she said quietly, look at me. His eyes snapped to hers, and she saw recognition there, barely, beneath the chaos. Focus on me, she said. Just me. Nothing else. Just my voice. Can't, he managed, his voice wrecked. Too much. I know. I know it's too much. But I'm here. I'm right here. She didn't touch him. Some instinct told her that would be too much stimulus. But she held his gaze. You're Kale Draven. You've survived worse than this. You'll survive this too. Lyra, breathe with me, she said. In, out, slow. Match me. She demonstrated, exaggerating her breathing, making it visible. Kyle tried to follow, his breaths coming in ragged gasps at first, then gradually evening out. The wildness in his eyes didn't disappear, but it receded slightly, pushed back by sheer force of will. Minutes passed. The council watched in silence. Finally, Kyle straightened, his control reasserting itself by inches. His hands uncurled, his breathing steadied. The tremors stopped. He looked at Varen, and his expression was murder. Are we done? Varen studied him for a long moment. For now, she said finally. But understand this, Warlord Draven. We will continue testing. We will push every boundary until we're satisfied that this bond is either real or false. And if at any point you fail, I won't, Kale said flatly. We'll see. Varen gestured to her people. We'll return in 3 days for the next assessment. Be ready. They left, taking their vials and their guards and their clinical cruelty with them. The door closed. Kyle stood frozen for another moment, then his knees buckled. Lyra caught him before he hit the ground, staggering under his weight. He wasn't unconscious, just exhausted, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. I've got you, she said, maneuvering him toward a chair. Sit. Just sit. He collapsed into it, his head dropping into his hands. His whole body was still trembling, aftershocks of the overload. How bad was it? Lyra asked quietly. Bad. His voice was muffled. Worse than the choosing. They concentrated the scent somehow, made it stronger. They're trying to kill you. They're trying to prove a point. He looked up at her, and his eyes were hollow. And they might succeed. I can't keep doing this, Lyra. Not without... He stopped. Without what? Without breaking, he finished, or without hurting someone. Probably you. Lyra crouched in front of him so they were eye level. You won't hurt me. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She said it with more confidence than she felt. Because I've seen what you are when you're in control. And I've seen what you are when you're fighting not to lose it. And in both cases, you've never directed it at me. Because you're quiet, Cale said bitterly. Because you don't trigger the response. But if they keep pushing, keep flooding me with sense until I can't think, then we find another way, Lyra interrupted. We fight back. Against the council? With what? They hold all the power here. Do they? Lyra stood, pacing now, her mind racing. They're testing us because they're afraid of what we represent, a bond that doesn't follow their rules, a pairing that shouldn't work but does. If we can prove it works, really prove it, not just survive their tests, then we shift the power. Cale watched her, something like hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. How? I don't know yet, Lyra admitted, but there has to be a way. There has to be something we're missing. Before Cale could respond, Marta burst through the door without knocking, her face pale. You need to see this, she said. Now. They followed Marta to the compound's main courtyard, where a crowd had gathered. Lyra pushed through, Kyle at her side, and stopped dead when she saw what everyone was staring at. A body. Hanging from the gates. Garrett, the thief from the flogging. He was dead, his face swollen and purple, a rope around his neck. But that wasn't the worst part. Pinned to his chest was a piece of parchment with words scrawled in harsh black ink. This is what happens to those who defy the council's justice. Lyra felt bile rise in her throat. They killed him. They're sending a message, Cale said, his voice tight. To everyone who saw you intervene. To anyone thinking about challenging their authority. A guard captain approached, his face grim. Orders, sir? Cut him down, Cale said. Give him a proper burial and find out who did this. We already know who did it, someone in the crowd muttered. Lyra turned to see a woman glaring at her with undisguised hatred. The council doesn't dirty their own hands, but everyone knows this is because of her. She pointed at Lyra. Because she convinced you to show mercy. Because she made you look weak. I'm not weak, Kyle said coldly. Then prove it, the woman spat. Stop letting that defective girl speak for you. Stop pretending she's anything more than a mistake. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Lyra felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, felt the hostility radiating from people she'd never even spoken to. They blamed her. For Garrett's death, for the council's tests, for disrupting the order of things. Disperse, Cale ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. Now! The crowd scattered, but slowly, reluctantly. The woman who'd spoken held Lyra's gaze for a moment longer, her expression promising violence, then turned and left. Lyra watched Garrett's body being cut down, watched it being carried away, and felt something harden inside her chest. This was her fault. Not directly. She hadn't killed him, but her intervention had marked him as connected to their defiance, and the council had made him an example. Don't, Kyle said quietly. Don't what? Don't blame yourself. They were going to kill him anyway? This was just convenient timing. You don't know that. I know the council, Kyle said. I know how they operate. Garrett was dead the moment they decided to use him in the test, whether you intervened or not. Lyra wanted to believe him, but the image of that parchment, those words, burned in her mind. We need to leave, she said suddenly. Cale stared at her. What? Leave. Get out of the compound, out of their jurisdiction. We can't win this fight on their terms. Run? Cale's voice was incredulous. You want me to abandon my territory, my people, everything I've built? I want you to survive, Lyra shot back. I want us to survive. Because they're not going to stop Cale. They're going to keep testing, keep pushing, until one of us breaks or dies. Is your territory worth that? It's not about worth, Kael said, his jaw tight. It's about responsibility. I have people depending on me. I can't just... They're hanging corpses in your courtyard to intimidate you, Lyra interrupted. How long before they decide you're too dangerous to leave in power? How long before the next body is yours? Kael went silent. I'm not asking you to abandon anyone, Lyra continued, softer now. I'm asking you to survive long enough to fight back on different terms. We can't beat the council here, but maybe somewhere else. There is nowhere else, Kael said flatly. The council's authority extends across all the territories. There's no safe haven. Then we make one, Lyra said. Or we find allies. People who are tired of the council's control. People who want change. You're talking about rebellion. I'm talking about survival. They stared at each other in the empty courtyard, the morning sun casting long shadows, and Lyra saw the moment Kael started to actually consider it. Then Marta was back, breathless, her eyes wide. The council's returned, she gasped. They're in your quarters. They're searching everything. Kael's expression went dark. They can't. They're doing it anyway, Marta said, and they've brought more guards. A lot more. Kael turned and ran, Lyra right behind him. They found Kael's quarters torn apart, papers scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, guards rifling through personal belongings with methodical efficiency. Varen stood in the center of it all, holding something in her hands. A book. Lyra recognized it. She'd seen it on Kael's desk. A journal of some kind, leather-bound, old. What are you doing? Kael demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Finding evidence, Varen said calmly. She opened the journal, flipped through pages covered in Kael's handwriting. Evidence that you've been planning to challenge the council for years. Evidence that this false bond was just another step in a longer rebellion. That's my private journal, which documents detailed criticisms of council policies, explorations of alternative governance structures, and most damningly, plans to unite the outer territories against central authority. Varen smiled. In light of this discovery, the council has voted unanimously to strip you of your title and territory, effective immediately. The room went silent. Lyra felt the world tilt. You can't, Kael said, but his voice had lost its certainty. We already have, Varen replied. You're no longer warlord of the Shard Belt Reach. Your lands will be redistributed, your people reassigned, and you... Her eyes glittered. You will stand trial for sedition. This is a setup, Lyra said, finding her voice. You planted that... We planted nothing, Varen interrupted. These are his words, his plans, written in his own hand. She closed the journal. The trial begins at dawn. Until then, you're both under house arrest. Guards moved forward, surrounding them. Kael looked at Lyra, and she saw desperation in his eyes, saw him calculating whether to fight, whether to run, whether to... Don't, she whispered. Not yet. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded fractionally. We'll comply, he said. For now. How wise, Varen said. She gestured to the guards. Confine them. Separate rooms. No contact. Wait, Lyra started, but guards were already pulling her away, pulling her toward the door, away from Kael. She looked back and saw him standing amid the wreckage of his life, his face carved from stone, his eyes following her until the door slammed shut between them. They locked Lyra in a room on the opposite side of the compound, small, windowless, with nothing but a cot and a chamber pot, a cell in everything but name. She sat on the cot and tried to think. The journal could be real. Kael had never hidden his disagreements with the council, but the timing was too convenient. They'd been looking for an excuse to remove him, and they'd found, or created, one. The trial would be a formality. They'd already decided the outcome. Kael would be convicted, exiled, or executed. And Lyra would disappear. No one would care what happened to the defective girl who'd caused all this trouble. Unless... An idea began to form, desperate and probably stupid, but it was the only one she had. She stood and pounded on the door. I need to speak to Counselor Varen, she shouted. Now! No response. She kept pounding, kept shouting, until finally the door opened and a guard looked in, annoyed. What? I need to speak to Counselor Varen, Lyra repeated. Tell her I have information about Kyle, about the bond, about everything. The guard's eyes narrowed. You're offering to testify against him? I'm offering to tell the truth, Lyra said. Isn't that what the council wants? The guard studied her for a moment, then nodded. Wait here, as if she had a choice. 20 minutes later, Varen entered the cell, her expression unreadable. You wanted to see me? I want to make a deal, Lyra said. Varen's eyebrow rose. A deal? You want Kale convicted. I can help with that. I can testify that the bond was false, that he chose me for political reasons, that everything you suspected was true. Lyra forced herself to meet Varen's eyes. In exchange, you let him live. Exile instead of execution. That's all I want. Varen studied her for a long moment. Why would you do that? Betray the man who chose you? Because I'm not stupid, Lyra said, the lies coming easier than she expected. I know what I am. I know this bond isn't real. And I know that if Kyle goes down, I go down with him. Unless I cooperate. She paused. I don't want to die for a mistake. Interesting. Varen circled her slowly. And if we agree to this deal, you'll testify publicly? Tell everyone that Kyle Draven manipulated the choosing for political gain. Yes. You understand what that means. You'll be confirming every suspicion, every rumor. You'll be painting yourself as either a fool or a conspirator. I understand. Varen stopped in front of her. Why should I believe you won't change your mind once you're in front of the council? Because I have nothing to gain by protecting him, Lyra said, and everything to lose if I don't protect myself. It was a gamble, a huge one, but Lyra was betting that Varen's arrogance, her certainty that she understood people's motivations, would make her believe that Lyra was just another survivor looking out for herself. Varen smiled slowly. Very well. You'll testify at dawn, and in exchange we'll exile Kyle Draven instead of executing him. She leaned closer. But if you deviate from your testimony by even a word, the deal is void. Understand? I understand. Good. Varen turned to leave, then paused. You know, I almost feel sorry for you. You really thought he chose you for something real, didn't you? You thought you were special. Lyra didn't answer. Varen left, and the door locked behind her. Lyra sat back down on the cot, her heart racing. She'd just bought Kyle's life with her testimony. Now she just had to figure out how to actually save him, because she hadn't told Varen the truth. She wasn't going to testify that the bond was false. She was going to do something much more dangerous. She was going to prove it was real, even if it killed her. Dawn came too fast. Lyra hadn't slept. She'd spent the night sitting on that cot, running through what she was about to do, testing every angle, looking for the flaw that would get them both killed. She found plenty of flaws. She did it anyway. The guards came for her as the first light crept under the door. They didn't speak, just gestured for her to follow, and she did, her legs steadier than she'd expected. Fear did strange things. Sometimes it paralyzed you, sometimes it sharpened you into something harder than you'd known you could be. Today, it was doing both. They led her through corridors she'd never seen, deeper into the compound's administrative heart. The stone here was older, darker, carved with symbols from the Fracture Wars. This was where power lived, where decisions that shaped territories were made behind closed doors. The trial chamber was circular, ringed with wooden benches that rose in tiers like an arena, already packed. Word had spread fast, the trial of Kyle Draven, the warlord who'd defied tradition and chosen wrong. People wanted to watch him fall. Lyra entered from a side door, and the noise dropped to whispers. Every eye turned to her. She kept her head up, her face blank, and walked to the witness stand the guard indicated. Kyle was already there. He stood in the center of the chamber, hands bound in front of him with iron chains that looked excessive for someone who wasn't fighting. But the chains weren't really about restraint. They were about humiliation, about showing the most powerful warlord in the Borderlands brought low. He looked tired, worn in a way she'd never seen him, like the night had taken something vital out of him. But when his eyes found hers across the room, they were alert, sharp, questioning. She couldn't answer, not yet. The council entered from the opposite door, all 5 of them, and took their seats at the high table, Varen in the center, flanked by the others. She looked pleased with herself. "We are gathered," Varen began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "to adjudicate charges of sedition against Kael Draven, former warlord of the Shardbelt Reach. The evidence is clear. His own writings document years of planning to undermine council authority. But before we pass judgment, we will hear testimony from the one person who witnessed his recent actions most closely." She turned to Lyra. "Miss Vance, you've agreed to testify truthfully about the nature of your bond with the accused. Is that correct?" Lyra stood. Her throat was dry, but her voice came out steady. "Yes." "Then tell us, in your own words, what happened at the choosing." This was it, the moment where she either saved them both or destroyed them. Lyra looked at Kael. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pleading, not afraid, just waiting. She turned back to the council. "At the choosing," she said clearly, "I was rejected by every warlord who scented me. Because I have no bond scent, I'm defective, everyone knows that." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "When Kael Draven entered the hall, I expected the same. Rejection, disgust. What I got instead was a choice I didn't understand." "Because he was using you," Varen prompted. "For political gain." "No," Lyra said. The room went silent. Varen's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "He didn't choose me for political gain," Lyra said, her heart hammering but her voice holding. "He chose me because I'm the only woman who doesn't hurt him." "We've been through this," Varen said impatiently. "Your lack of scent isn't a lack," Lyra interrupted. "It's a match." She had their attention now. Every person in that chamber was listening, leaning forward, trying to understand. "You tested him with concentrated scents," Lyra continued, directing her words to the room at large now, not just the council. "You watched him nearly break under the overload. You saw what happens when bond scents hit him, the pain, the chaos, the violence he has to fight not to unleash. That's not normal. That's not how dominants are supposed to react to bond scents." "Which proves he's damaged," the bearded council member said. "Unstable, which proves the system is incomplete," Lyra shot back. "You've built everything around this idea that bond scents are universal, that everyone experiences them the same way. But Kael doesn't. For him, bond scents are overwhelming, destructive. Except mine. Mine doesn't hurt him. Mine lets him think. And that's not political manipulation. That's compatibility you don't have categories for." "Convenient theory," Varen said coldly. "But you have no proof." "Then test it," Lyra said. Varen blinked. "What?" "Test it," Lyra repeated. "Right here. Right now. Expose him to bond scents again, like you did before. But this time, let me be present. Let me try to stabilize him. If the bond is false, my presence won't make a difference. But if it's real, if what we have actually functions, then you'll see it work." "That's not," Varen started. "You wanted proof," Lyra said, her voice rising. "You wanted to see the bond in action. So let's see it. Unless you're afraid of what you'll find." The chamber erupted. People were shouting, arguing, some demanding the test, others calling it a waste of time. The council members were conferring in heated whispers. Varen's face flushed with anger. Kael was staring at Lyra like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Finally, Varen raised a hand for silence. It took a while to get it. "Very well," she said, her voice tight. "We'll conduct the test. But understand this, Miss Vance. If you fail, if there's even a hint that you're manufacturing a response, the consequences will be severe, for both of you." "I understand," Lyra said. "Bring the vials," Varen ordered. The same bearded council member who'd administered the test before left and returned minutes later with the leather case. He set it on a table near where Kael stood, opening it to reveal rows of glass vials filled with concentrated bond scent. "The procedure will be identical to the previous test," Varen announced. "We will expose Warlord Draven to escalating concentrations of bond scent. Miss Vance will be permitted to remain in proximity. We will observe whether her presence mitigates his responses." She paused. "If at any point he becomes violent, guards will intervene." 4 guards moved into position around Kael, hands on weapons. Kael's eyes found Lyra's again. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Yes, I do, she replied. If this goes wrong, it won't. She said it with more confidence than she felt. Trust me. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. All right, he said. Let's see what happens. The bearded council member selected the first vial, small, the concentration relatively mild, and approached Kael. He uncorked it and held it at chest height. Inhale, he instructed. Kael did. His reaction was immediate. Pupils dilating, shoulders tensing, breathing quickening, but not as bad as before. More controlled. Lyra moved closer, stopping about 3 feet away, close enough to be present without crowding. Look at me, she said softly. Kael's eyes snapped to hers. Breathe with me, she said, falling into the pattern they'd used before. In, out, steady. She watched him fight the overload, watched him use her voice as an anchor. His breathing evened out. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. The council member corked the vial. Proceed to the next level, Varen ordered. The second vial was larger, stronger. This time when Kael inhaled, he staggered, his chains rattling. The guards tensed, ready to move. Lyra saw the wildness creeping into his eyes, saw him starting to lose the battle. She stepped closer. Kael, she said, louder now. Stay with me. Focus. Can't, he gritted out, his voice breaking. Too much? You can, Lyra insisted. She moved until she was right in front of him, close enough that if he lashed out, she'd be the first thing he hit. Dangerous, stupid, necessary. You've done this before. You'll do it again. Just focus on my voice. Nothing else matters. Just me. Lyra. His hands were trembling, the chains shaking. I'm here, she said. I'm right here. You're not alone in this. The words seemed to reach him. He locked onto her gaze like a drowning man grabbing a rope, and slowly, so slowly, the wildness receded. His breathing steadied. His hands stopped shaking. The council member corked the second vial, looking surprised. Murmurs ran through the watching crowd. Interesting, Varen said, though she didn't sound pleased. Continue. The third vial was the size of the one that had nearly broken him before. Lyra knew this was the real test. If he could survive this with her present, they had a chance. The council member uncorked it. Kael inhaled and broke. It hit him like a physical blow. He went to his knees, the chains clattering, a sound ripping out of him that was pure anguish. The guards moved forward, but Lyra was faster. She dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands going to either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. Kael, she said sharply, you're stronger than this. You're stronger than anything they can throw at you. Look at me. Look at me. His eyes were unfocused, wild, seeing something that wasn't there. You're at the choosing, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the chaos. You're standing in front of me for the first time, remember? Everyone else was too much, but I wasn't. I was quiet. I was calm. Remember how that felt? Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. That's what I am now, Lyra continued. Right now. In this moment. Everything else is noise. I'm the quiet. I'm the calm. Focus on that. Come back to that. Kael's breathing was ragged, harsh, but he was listening. She could see him fighting, see him trying to pull himself back from the edge. That's it, Lyra said. You're doing it. Just keep going. Keep fighting. His hands came up. She'd forgotten they were bound, and his fingers brushed her wrists where she was holding his face. The touch was light, tentative, like he was checking if she was real. I'm real, she whispered. I'm here. You're not doing this alone. Minutes passed. The chamber was so silent Lyra could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, Kael's eyes cleared. The wildness faded. His breathing evened out, and when he spoke his voice was hoarse but his. I'm back. Lyra exhaled shakily and pulled her hands away, sitting back on her heels. Yeah, you are. The council member had already corked the vial, stepping back quickly. The chamber erupted again, this time in genuine shock. People were standing, pointing, arguing. Some looked amazed, others angry. The guards were exchanging confused glances, unsure what they'd just witnessed. Varen's face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the table edge. Silence, she commanded, and eventually got it. She looked at Lyra and Kael, something like hatred in her eyes. That proves nothing. She could be. She's not doing anything, a voice called out from the crowd. Lyra turned to see an older man standing in the third tier, someone she didn't recognize. I'm a healer. I've studied bond responses for 30 years. What we just saw was genuine stabilization. Her presence counteracts his overload response. That's not manipulation. That's a functional bond. Hear, hear! Someone else called. And suddenly there were voices joining in, people who'd seen what Lyra had seen, who couldn't deny the evidence in front of them. This is irregular, Varen said sharply. The council has not reached a verdict. Then reach one, Kael said, standing slowly, Lyra rising with him. His voice carried across the chamber, steady and strong despite what he'd just been through. You wanted proof. You got it. The bond is real. It doesn't follow your rules, but it works. And unless you're prepared to argue that bonds only count when they fit your categories, you have no grounds to dissolve it. You still wrote seditious material, the bearded council member said. That doesn't change. I wrote criticisms, Kael corrected. Analyses. Questions about whether the current system serves everyone or just those in power. If asking questions is sedition, then every thinking person in this room is guilty. You plan to unite the outer territories. I explored the possibility, Kael interrupted. In a private journal. Having thoughts isn't a crime, acting on them would be. But I never acted. I never recruited. I never plotted. I just wrote. He paused. Unless the council has decided that even private thoughts are subject to their authority? The question hung in the air like a blade. Varen's face was tight with fury. She knew she was losing control of the room, could feel the momentum shifting. The council will deliberate, she said sharply. We'll reconvene. No, said another voice. This time it came from the first tier, and when Lyra looked, she saw a man she recognized, Hrothgar, the warlord who'd claimed Mira at the choosing. He stood, his massive frame unmistakable. With respect, Counselor Varen, he said, his voice a rumble. The people have seen enough. We've watched this trial become a persecution. We've watched you twist laws to target a man whose only crime was finding compatibility where you said none existed. And we've watched Miss Vance prove, beyond any doubt, that the bond between them functions. He looked around the chamber. I move that the council drop all charges and recognize the bond as legitimate. Seconded, called another warlord. Thirded, shouted someone from the back. The chamber descended into chaos again, people calling out support, arguing, debating. The council looked like they'd been hit by a storm they hadn't seen coming. Varen stood, her chair scraping back. This is not a vote, someone shouted. Put it to a vote. The council doesn't answer to, then maybe it should, Hrothgar roared, and his voice cut through everything. You claim to represent us. Prove it. Put it to a vote. All warlords and territory representatives present, right now. Varen looked around the chamber, saw the faces watching her, waiting, saw the trap closing. If she refused, she'd prove Kael's criticisms right, that the council served only itself. If she agreed, she'd lose. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. A vote. All in favor of dropping charges against Kael Draven and recognizing his bond with Lyra Vance as legitimate, raise your hands. Hands went up across the chamber. Lyra watched them rise. First a few, then more, then a flood. Hrothgar. The healer. Warlords she didn't know. Territory representatives, common people who'd crowded in to watch. Not everyone. There were plenty who kept their hands down, who glared at Kael and Lyra with unconcealed hatred, but more than half. Significantly more than half. Varen's face went pale as she counted. The motion carries, she said, each word like pulling teeth. Charges dropped. Bond recognized. She looked at Kael with pure venom. You're free to go. The chamber erupted in cheers and jeers in equal measure. Guards moved to unlock Kael's chains. The moment they fell away, he turned to Lyra, and without thinking, she stepped into him. His arms came around her steady and solid, and for the first time since the choosing, she felt safe. You magnificent, reckless idiot, he murmured into her hair. Worked, didn't it? She whispered back. Nearly gave me a heart attack. You've survived worse. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before, something warm and real and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. Thank you, he said simply. Before Lyra could respond, Hrothgar was there, clapping Kyle on the shoulder hard enough to stagger him. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in a decade," he said. "Both of you, standing against the council like that." He grinned. "They're going to hate you forever." "They already did," Kale said dryly. "Fair point." Hrothgar looked at Lyra. "And you. That was clever. Forcing the test, proving the bond in front of everyone so they couldn't deny it. Where'd you learn tactics like that?" "Desperation," Lyra said honestly, "and spite." Hrothgar laughed, a deep booming sound. "I like her. You chose well, Draven." Other warlords were approaching now, offering congratulations or just staring, trying to reconcile what they'd seen with what they'd believed. The healer who'd spoken up came over, introduced himself as Marcus, and spent 10 minutes asking Lyra questions about how she'd known what to do, how she'd learned to stabilize Kyle. "I didn't learn," she admitted. "I just tried things, saw what worked." "Remarkable," Marcus said, shaking his head. "You've discovered something we've never documented, a bond based on absence rather than presence. The implications for others like Warlord Draven—" "Later," Kale interrupted gently. "We've had enough examinations for one day." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Of course, but I'd like to study this further with your permission. This could help others." "We'll talk," Kale said, which wasn't a yes but wasn't a no. The crowd was thinning now, people filing out, still arguing about what they'd witnessed. The council had already left through their private exit, Varen's face a thundercloud. Finally, it was just Kale and Lyra standing in the emptying chamber, exhaustion crashing over both of them like a wave. "We should go," Kale said, "before they change their minds." "Can they do that?" "Probably not, but I'd rather not test it." They walked out together, through corridors that felt different now, less oppressive, less hostile. People nodded to them as they passed. Some even smiled. When they reached Kyle's quarters, still a mess from the search, but home, Lyra collapsed onto the first chair she reached. "That was insane," she said. "That was brilliant," Kale corrected, moving to pour water from a pitcher, handing her a cup. "Terrifying and brilliant." "I thought you were going to lose it," Lyra admitted, "with the third vial. I almost did," Kyle said quietly. He sat across from her, his own cup untouched. "But you pulled me back. Again." He paused. "I need to understand how you do that." "I don't know how I do it," Lyra said. "I just talk to you. Focus you. It's not exactly complicated." "It's more than that." Kyle leaned forward, his eyes intent. "When everything else is chaos, you're clarity. You're the one fixed point I can hold on to. That's not just absence of scent, that's something else." Lyra didn't know what to say to that. The intensity in his gaze was too much, too real. "We should clean up," she said finally, gesturing at the scattered papers. "Get things back to normal." "Normal," Kale repeated, something like humor in his voice. "I don't think we're going to get normal." He was right. The next days proved it. News of the trial spread across the territories faster than wildfire. The warlord who'd defied the council, the defective girl who'd proved the bond, the vote that had challenged decades of precedent. Some people celebrated it, called it progress, called it hope. Others seethed, saw it as the beginning of chaos, the breakdown of order. But everyone talked about it, and slowly, carefully, things began to change. A week after the trial, Kyle was formally reinstated as warlord of the Shardbelt Reach. The council tried to attach conditions, but the other warlords pushed back, citing the vote. Kyle got his territory back, his authority restored, though everyone knew the relationship with the council would never be the same. 2 weeks later, the first petition arrived. A young woman from the Southern Territories, writing to say she'd been rejected at 3 choosings because her scent was too weak. Could Lyra help? Could she explain how she'd made it work? Then another petition. And another. People who didn't fit the standard categories. People who'd been rejected, exiled, told they were broken. All of them asking if maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Lyra read the letters in Kyle's quarters, her quarters now too, officially, though she still slept in the adjoining room, and felt the weight of them. "I don't know how to help them," she admitted to Kyle. "I barely know how to help us." "Then we figure it out together," Kyle said. He was standing at the window, looking out over the Shard Belt Reach, his territory stretching to the horizon. Marcus wants to study bond variations. Rothgar's suggested creating a network for people like us. Others are talking about changing the laws around the choosing entirely. He turned to look at her. You started something, Lyra, whether you meant to or not. I just wanted to survive, she said. You did more than survive, Kael said quietly. You changed the game. Lyra looked at the stack of letters, at this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, at the life that had somehow built itself around her in the weeks since the choosing. What happens now? She asked. Kael smiled, and it was genuine, warm, the kind of smile she was seeing more often now. Now, we build something new, together. He held out his hand. Lyra took it, and for the first time since standing in that choosing hall, rejected and invisible and certain her life was over, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found where she belonged. Not in spite of being different, because of it. Building something new turned out to be harder than surviving something old. 3 months after the trial, Lyra stood in what had once been a storage hall and was now something between a meeting room and a refuge, watching 27 people who didn't fit anywhere else try to figure out where they belonged. The letters had kept coming. Then the people themselves started arriving. Women who'd been rejected at choosings. Men whose bond sensitivity made them dangerous to themselves and others. Pairs who'd formed connections that didn't match the approved patterns. All of them looking for answers Lyra didn't have. We need structure, Marcus was saying, pacing in front of a slate board covered in notes. The healer had thrown himself into studying bond variations with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found a mystery worth solving. Categories? Definitions. Ways to identify and match people who fall outside standard parameters. Or we could just let people figure it out themselves, countered a woman named Sarah, who'd bonded with another woman in defiance of every rule the council had. The whole point is that the old categories don't work. Without some framework, we're just creating chaos, Marcus argued. Maybe chaos is better than the alternative, Sarah shot back. Lyra rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. These arguments had been happening for weeks. Everyone agreed the old system was broken, but no one agreed on what should replace it. Kael appeared at her elbow, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. Migraine? Getting there. You could step in, stop the arguing. They're not arguing with me. They're arguing with each other. That's actually progress. She sipped the tea, mint, the way she'd mentioned liking once, and he'd remembered. Besides, I don't have answers either. You have experience. That counts for something. Lyra watched Marcus and Sarah continue their debate, others joining in now, voices rising. Experience surviving, that's not the same as knowing how to help others survive. It's a start, Kael said. Before Lyra could respond, a commotion at the door made everyone stop. A guard entered, his face tight with tension. Warlord Draven. There's a delegation from the council. They're demanding entry to the compound. The room went silent. How many? Kael asked, his voice neutral, but his body already tensing. Counselor Varen and 6 guards. She says she's here on official business. Kael's jaw tightened. They hadn't heard from the council directly since the trial. Communication had gone through intermediaries, official notices delivered by courier. Varen showing up in person meant something had changed. Let them in, Kael said, but watch them. I want guards on every exit. The delegation arrived 10 minutes later, Varen leading them with the same cold authority she'd always had. She took in the room, the people gathered there, the notes on the board, the obvious evidence of organization, and her expression hardened. Warlord Draven. Miss Vance. We need to speak. Privately. Anything you have to say can be said here, Kael replied. These people have a right to hear what concerns them. This doesn't concern them. This concerns you. Varen's eyes swept the room again. And whatever unauthorized operation you're running here. It's not unauthorized, Lyra said, finding her voice. We're helping people. That's not illegal. Undermining the choosing system is, Varen countered, and that's exactly what you're doing. Encouraging people to reject legitimate bonds, to pursue connections outside approved channels, to ignore the laws that have kept the Borderlands stable for generations. The laws that exiled people for being different, Sarah said sharply. The laws that left some of us to die rather than admit the system was incomplete. The laws that prevented chaos, Varen shot back. The laws that ensured compatible bonds, stable territories, predictable succession. You want to throw all that away because a few individuals don't fit the pattern? We're not a few, Marcus said quietly. In 3 months, we've documented over 100 bond variations that the standard choosing process failed to accommodate. 100 people who were told they were defective when they were simply different. That's not a few. That's a failure of the system. Varen's face tightened. The Council is aware of your research. It's part of why I'm here. This has gone too far. You're creating divisions, encouraging instability, giving false hope to people who need to accept their place in the social order. Their place? Lyra repeated, anger flaring. You mean alone? Exiled? Dead? I mean realistic, Varen said coldly. Not everyone can be accommodated. Some people simply aren't meant to bond. Telling them otherwise is cruel. What's cruel is giving up on them without trying, Lyra said. What's cruel is building a system that only works for some people and calling everyone else broken. And what's your alternative? Varen demanded. Let everyone choose whoever they want? Ignore biology? Pretend compatibility doesn't matter? You'll create unstable bonds that fail, territories that fracture, conflicts that escalate into violence. The choosing exists for a reason. Then improve it, Kael cut in. Expand it. Make room for variations instead of punishing them. That's what we're trying to do here. Without authority, Varen said, without oversight, without any consideration for the broader consequences. She pulled a document from her coat, unfolding it. The Council has issued a formal decree. All activities related to alternative bonding practices must cease immediately. This facility will be shut down. Anyone currently residing here will return to their home territories or face exile. And you, she looked at Kael and Lyra, will submit to Council supervision for the next year to ensure you're not continuing these activities. The room erupted. People were shouting, protesting, some standing as if ready to fight. Varen's guards moved forward, hands on weapons, and the tension spiked dangerously. Enough! Kael's voice cut through the chaos. He waited until silence fell, then turned to Varen. You can't enforce this. The warlords voted to recognize non-standard bonds. You can't reverse that without their support. The warlords voted to recognize your bond, Varen corrected. They said nothing about sanctioning a wholesale restructuring of the choosing system. This decree has the backing of 4 out of 5 council members and a majority of territorial governors. You're outnumbered. Then we'll fight it, Lyra said. With what? Varen smiled thinly. You have no legal standing, no official authority, no resources beyond what Warlord Draven provides from his own territory. The moment we cut off that support, try it, Kael said softly, dangerously. Try to cut off my resources. See what the other warlords say when you attempt to override their territorial autonomy. Varen's smile faded. You're threatening rebellion. I'm defending my right to use my own territory's resources as I see fit, including providing sanctuary to people who need it. He stepped forward, and even Varen's guards tensed. You want to shut this down? You'll have to go through me, and every warlord who's tired of the council deciding what kinds of bonds are acceptable. You don't have that support, Varen said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Are you sure? Kael asked. Because I've been having conversations, lots of conversations. Hrothgar isn't the only one who thinks the system needs updating. You might be surprised how many warlords have family members, friends, people they care about who've been failed by the current choosing process. Varen's eyes narrowed. If you're organizing, I'm talking, Kael interrupted. Sharing experiences, building consensus. That's not rebellion. That's politics. I thought the council appreciated politics. A long silence stretched. Finally, Varen refolded her document. The decree stands, but I'll give you 1 week to present your case to the full council. All territorial representatives, all warlords, everyone with a stake in this. You want to change the system? Convince them. Convince enough of them to override our decree. Otherwise, this ends. 1 week, Kael repeated. 7 days. Then we enforce the decree, and there will be no more discussion. Varen turned to leave, then paused. You think you're helping these people, but you're giving them hope for something that can't exist. The Borderlands run on order, on predictability, on bonds that make sense. What you're offering is chaos dressed up as compassion, and chaos always ends in blood. She left, her guards following, and the room erupted again the moment the door closed. This time Kyle let them argue, let them panic, let them vent. He just looked at Lyra. 1 week, he said quietly. We can do this, she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. We have to. The next 7 days were a blur of preparation, arguments, and desperate strategizing. Marcus compiled data on every bond variation they'd documented, creating charts and analyses that proved the scope of the problem. Sarah organized testimonials from people who'd found connections outside standard parameters, stories that put faces and names to the statistics. Others reached out to contacts in different territories, building support, calling in favors. Kale spent hours in meetings with other warlords, making his case, arguing that flexibility wasn't weakness. Some were receptive, others were hostile. Most were cautious, waiting to see which way power would shift before committing. Lyra did what she did best, talk to people. She visited territories, met with families who'd lost members to exile, spoke with healers who'd seen the casualties of a system that didn't accommodate variation. She listened more than she spoke, learning what people actually needed versus what the council claimed they wanted. On the 5th day, she met a woman named Tessa in a small settlement on the eastern border. Tessa was maybe 40, weathered by hard living, and she'd lost her daughter to exile 3 years ago after 5 failed choosings. The daughter had written once from beyond the territories, then never again. They told us she was better off, Tessa said, her voice flat. Better to accept reality than cling to false hope. Better to start over somewhere new than keep failing here. She looked at Lyra with eyes that had cried themselves empty. Do you know what it's like? Watching your child walk into the wasteland because the system says she doesn't fit? No, Lyra admitted. But I know what it's like to be that child. Almost. Almost isn't the same. No, it's not. Lyra paused. But I'm trying to make sure fewer people have to go through what your daughter did. What you did. Tessa studied her for a long moment. The council says you're dangerous, that you're undermining everything. The council says a lot of things. Are you? Dangerous? Lyra thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, she said finally. To the way things have always been. To the idea that there's only one right way to bond, one acceptable pattern. If that's dangerous, then I'm dangerous. Something like respect flickered across Tessa's face. Good, because the way things have always been killed my daughter, so yes, I'll support you. I'll testify. Whatever you need. By the 6th day, they had 17 testimonials, support pledges from 8 warlords, and data showing that bond variation affected approximately 15% of the population, far more than anyone had acknowledged. By the 7th day, Lyra was exhausted, terrified, and absolutely certain this wouldn't be enough. We need something more, she told KL the night before the council session. They were in his quarters, their quarters, reviewing notes by lamplight. Data and testimonials are good, but Varen will counter with stability arguments, tradition, risk. We need something that changes the emotional calculus. Like what? Lyra stared at the papers scattered across the desk, and suddenly an idea hit her. Risky. Maybe stupid, but it might work. We need to show them what they're destroying, she said slowly. Not just tell them. Show them. How? She looked at him. The choosing is in 3 days, in the southern territories. So? So we attend, publicly, and we watch them exile people who don't fit. We make the council watch it too. Make everyone see what their precious order actually costs. Kyle went very still. That would be inflammatory. That would be honest, Lyra corrected. The council hides the exiles, pushes them out quietly, early morning, no witnesses. But if we're there, if everyone sees what happens to the people who fail the choosing, they can't pretend it's humane anymore. Varen will never allow it. Varen doesn't control the southern choosings. Warlord Dax does. And Dax lost his sister to exile 10 years ago. He'll let us in. Kale rubbed his face, thinking, this could backfire spectacularly. So could everything else we're doing, Lyra said. But at least this way, we're telling the truth. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, We'll try, but we need to move fast. The council session convened at noon in the Great Hall. Every seat filled, every warlord and territorial representative present. The room buzzed with tension and anticipation. Varen opened the proceedings with a speech about tradition, stability, and the dangers of unchecked change. She presented the council's position methodically, building a case against what she called the drive-in initiative, with statistics about historical bond success rates and warnings about social fragmentation. Then Kale stood to present their counter-argument. He was brilliant. Lyra had seen him in negotiations before, but never like this. He took Varen's arguments apart piece by piece, showing how the data was selective, how the success rates ignored the people who were never given a chance to succeed. He presented Marcus's research, Sarah's testimonials, the support pledges from other warlords. By the time he finished, the room was split. Some people were nodding, convinced. Others looked skeptical. Most looked uncertain. Then Lyra stood. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her nerves. "I'm not a warlord. I'm not a representative. I'm just someone who survived a system that tried to erase me. But I need to tell you something. Tomorrow morning, there's a choosing in the Southern Territories. And after that choosing, there will be exiles. People who failed to bond, who didn't fit the pattern, who will be sent into the wasteland to die slowly or survive however they can. The council doesn't talk about this part. They don't like to acknowledge what happens to the people who don't fit. But it happens. Every single choosing. And I'm asking you, all of you, to come see it. Come watch what your system actually does to people. Then decide if that's the order worth preserving." The room erupted in noise. Varen was on her feet, objecting, calling it a spectacle, a manipulation. Other council members were arguing with warlords who were arguing with each other. It was chaos. But through the chaos, Lyra saw faces, people who looked uncomfortable, people who looked curious, people who maybe were starting to question what they'd always accepted. Varen called for order, eventually got it. "This is inappropriate. The exile process is handled with dignity, with privacy, with shame," Lyra interrupted. "You hide it because you know how it looks, how it feels. But if the system is just, if it's necessary, then it should be able to withstand scrutiny. So I'm asking for scrutiny. Come tomorrow, watch, then vote." "This is not how we conduct," Varen started. "I'll go," Hrothgar said, standing. "I want to see it." "As will I," said another warlord. Then another. Within minutes, half the room had committed to attending the Southern choosing. Varen's face was stone. "Fine, we'll observe, but this changes nothing. The vote will proceed as scheduled after the choosing, and I expect it to reflect the values this council was founded on." "So do I," Lyra said quietly. The session adjourned. The Southern choosing took place in a stone amphitheater open to the sky. It was smaller than the one where Lyra had been chosen, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. Lyra stood with Kael in the observer section, surrounded by warlords and council members and representatives who'd made the journey. Varen was there, her expression closed. The choosing itself proceeded normally. Women presented, warlords scented them, bonds formed or didn't, claims were made. By midday, it was done. 15 women had been claimed. 4 had not. Lyra watched as the 4 were separated from the others, led to a different area. They were given basic supplies, water, some food, a blanket. Nothing else. Then the head warlord of the Southern Territories, Dax, a man with gray hair and sad eyes, spoke. "You have failed to bond. By law, you are exiled from the territories. You may not return. You have until sunset to leave the boundaries. After that, you will be considered hostile and treated accordingly." One of the women, barely 20, started crying. Another just stared at the ground, resigned. The third and fourth held each other's hands, their faces blank with shock. "Please," the young woman said, her voice breaking. "Please, I can try again. I can—" "The law is clear," Dax said, and he sounded tired. "I'm sorry." The women were escorted to the edge of the territory. Lyra and the others followed at a distance, witnessing. At the boundary, marked by old stone pillars, the guards stopped. The women kept walking, slowly, reluctantly, into the empty lands beyond. Lyra watched until they were small figures on the horizon, then turned to look at the people who'd come to observe. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked unmoved. Varen's expression hadn't changed at all. But Tessa was there. Lyra had invited her, and Tessa was crying. Not loud, just tears streaming down her face as she watched 4 more women walk the same path her daughter had. And she wasn't the only one. A warlord Lyra didn't know had his jaw clenched tight, his eyes too bright. A representative from the eastern valleys was shaking her head slowly, murmuring something under her breath. Even Hrothgar looked grim. "This is what you wanted us to see?" Varen asked coldly. "This is what I wanted you to remember," Lyra replied. "When you vote, when you decide if the system is worth preserving, remember them." The vote took place that evening, back in the Great Hall. Varen presented the motion one more time. Cease all alternative bonding activities, close the facility, enforce council supervision. Then she called for votes. All in favor of the decree. Hands went up, Varen's. 2 other council members, some of the more conservative warlords. Maybe a third of the room. All opposed. More hands. Significantly more. Hrothgar, Dax. Representatives Lyra had spoken with. People who'd witnessed the exiles. People who'd heard the testimonials. People who just wanted something to change. Varen counted, her face growing paler with each hand. "The motion fails," she said finally, the words forced. "The decree is rejected." The room exploded in noise, cheers, arguments, shock, but Varen wasn't done. "However, the council cannot simply abandon oversight. If these alternative bonding practices are to continue, they must be regulated. Supervised, made official." "Agreed," Kael said, standing. "We're not asking for anarchy, we're asking for recognition, for support, for the resources to help people who fall outside standard parameters." Varen's eyes narrowed. "You want official status. We want acknowledgement that the system is incomplete and permission to fill the gaps. Under oversight, with accountability, following reasonable guidelines. But yes, official status." The room went quiet as people processed this. Then Dax stood. "I move that we establish an alternative bonding registry, a formal structure for documenting, supporting, and regulating non-standard bonds, overseen by a committee that includes council representation, but also people with expertise in bond variations." He looked at Lyra. "People like Miss Vance and Healer Marcus." "Seconded," Hrothgar called. The debate lasted another hour, but the outcome was clear. The momentum had shifted. Too many people had seen the exiles, heard the stories, recognized that the system wasn't working for everyone. When the final vote came, the alternative bonding registry was approved by a 2/3 majority. Varen stood slowly. "Very well. The registry is established, but understand, this will be monitored closely. Any indication that it's causing instability, any evidence of failed bonds or territorial conflicts, and this decision will be revisited." "Fair enough," Kael said. Varen looked at Lyra, and for the first time there was something other than hatred in her eyes. Not respect exactly, but acknowledgement. "You won," Varen said quietly. "Congratulations." "We all won," Lyra replied. "Everyone who'll have a chance now that they wouldn't have had before." Varen didn't respond. She just turned and left, her remaining supporters following. The room erupted in celebration. People were embracing, laughing, crying. Marcus was already planning the registry structure. Sarah was talking about outreach programs. Hrothgar was making jokes about bureaucracy that had people laughing despite the tension. Kael found Lyra in the chaos, pulled her aside to a quieter corner. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. "You started it. That first moment in the choosing hall when you didn't give up. Every moment after, when you kept fighting. This," he gestured at the celebrating crowd, "this is because you refused to accept what everyone said was impossible." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. "I was just trying to survive." "You did more than survive," Kael said, echoing words he'd said before. But this time they felt different, more true. "You changed everything." He pulled her into an embrace and Lyra let herself lean into it, let herself feel the weight of what they'd accomplished, the magnitude of what was still to come. "What happens now?" she asked against his shoulder. "Now we build it properly. The registry. the support systems, the training. We make sure this works. He pulled back to look at her. Together. Together, Lyra agreed. 6 months later, Lyra stood in the same amphitheater where she'd witnessed the exiles, but everything was different. This was the first official choosing to include the alternative registry. Women who didn't bond through standard channels would have a second option: counseling, evaluation, matching with others who had non-standard patterns. No one would be exiled without exhausting every possibility. Lyra wasn't participating. She was observing, helping Marcus and the new registry staff coordinate, making sure everything ran smoothly. She watched a young woman, maybe 19, fail to bond with 3 different warlords. Watched the panic start to set in, the fear that she was about to be exiled like so many before her. Then Lyra stepped forward. "There's another option," she said gently. "If you're willing." The woman looked at her with desperate hope. "Anything. Come with me. We'll run some evaluations, see if we can identify your bond pattern. It might take time, it might not work, but you'll have a chance." The woman burst into tears, nodding frantically. Lyra led her away from the choosing floor toward the registry station they'd set up, and caught Kyle's eye across the amphitheater. He was talking with Dax, probably coordinating security, but he paused to smile at her. She smiled back. 3 other women joined them at the registry station over the course of the day. Not all of them would find bonds. Lyra had learned to be realistic about that. But all of them would have options beyond exile. All of them would have people who saw their differences as puzzles to solve, rather than failures to punish. By sunset, Lyra was exhausted, but satisfied. The choosing had gone well. The registry had functioned. No one had been exiled. She found Kale waiting for her at the edge of the amphitheater as the crowds dispersed. "Good day?" he asked. "Good day," she confirmed. 4 registry intakes, all promising. Marcus thinks 2 of them might be compatible with each other, actually. A bonded pair instead of a warlord match. "That'll make the traditional warlords nervous," Kale said with amusement. "Everything makes them nervous. They'll adjust." They walked back toward their quarters. They'd been sharing the main room for months now, the adjoining room converted into an office for registry work, and Lyra felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "I got a letter today," Kyle said, "from the Eastern Valleys. They want to establish a registry satellite there. Asked if we'd send advisors to help set it up. That's good. Expansion. That's what we wanted." "It's what you wanted," Kyle corrected. "I just wanted to survive the council. You wanted to change the world." "I wanted to help people," Lyra said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Kale stopped walking, turned to face her. "You stood in that choosing hall 6 months ago and challenged everything the Borderlands had built. You risked exile, death, worse, because you saw injustice and couldn't stay silent. That's not just helping people. That's revolution." Lyra shook her head. "Revolution is too big a word. We just adjusted things, made room for people who didn't fit." "You made room," Kyle said. "For me first, then for everyone else. And now the entire system is different because you refused to accept that being different meant being worthless." He reached for her hand and she gave it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become natural over the months. "I choose you," he said quietly. "Every day. Not because you don't have a cent, because you have everything else. Courage. Compassion. The absolute stubborn refusal to give up on people. That's what I sensed in the choosing hall. That's what I sense now." Lyra felt tears well up, but these were good tears, happy tears. "I choose you too," she whispered, "even though you're difficult and stubborn and sometimes too protective." "Sometimes?" Kyle smiled. "You're being generous." "I'm feeling generous." He kissed her then, gentle and real, and Lyra kissed back, thinking about the path that had led here. From invisible and rejected to recognized and valued. From alone to bonded. From surviving to building something that mattered. When they pulled apart, the sun had set completely, stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Come on," Kale said. "Marta's making dinner, and if we're late, she'll lecture us about proper meal schedules." "Can't have that," Lyra said, laughing. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they entered their quarters, Lyra saw the stack of new registry applications waiting on the desk, saw the maps marked with potential satellite locations, saw the evidence of work still to do, but also saw the space they'd built together, the life they'd carved out of chaos, the future that had seemed impossible when she'd stood in that choosing hall, certain she was broken. She wasn't broken. She'd never been broken. She was just different. And different, it turned out, was exactly what the world needed. Marta called them to dinner, and Lyra went, Kael's hand warm in hers, surrounded by people who'd become family, working toward a future where no one would be exiled for failing to fit a pattern that was never complete to begin with. The Borderlands were changing, and Lyra Vance, the girl no one could choose, was leading the way, not by being perfect, by being exactly who she was. And that, finally, was enough.